Eliza Orzeszkowa, The Argonauts. Leave a comment if you have an idea for the next book. Chapter 1. It was the mansion of a millionaire. On the furniture and the walls of drawing rooms, colors and gleams played as on the surface of a pearl shell. Mirrors reflected pictures, and inlaid floors shone like mirrors. Here and there, dark tapestry and massive curtains seemed to decrease the effect, but only at first sight, for in fact, they lent the whole interior a dignity which was almost church-like. At some points everything glistened, gleamed, changed into azure, scarlet, gold, bronze, and the various tints of white peculiar to plaster of Paris, marble, silk, porcelain. In that house were products of Chinese and Japanese skill. The styles of remote ages were there, and the most exquisite and elegant among modern styles, lamps, chandeliers, candlesticks, vases, ornamental art in its highest development. Withal, much taste and skill was evident, a certain tact in placing things and a keenness in disposing them, which indicated infallibly the hand and the mind of a woman who was far above mediocrity. The furnishing of this mansion must have cost sums which to the poor would seem colossal, and very considerable even to the wealthy. Aloysius Darvid, the owner of this mansion, had not inherited his millions. He had won them with his own iron labor, and he toiled continually to increase them. His industry, inventiveness, and energy were inexhaustible. To him business seemed to be what water is to a fish, the element which gives delight and freedom. What was his business? Great and complicated enterprises, the erection of public edifices, the purchase, sale, and exchange of values of various descriptions, exchanges in many markets and corporations. To finish all this business, it was necessary to possess qualities of the most opposite character: the courage of the lion and the caution of the fox, the talons of the falcon and the elasticity of the cat. His life was passed at a gaming table, composed of the whole surface of a gigantic state. That life was a species of continuous punting at a bank kept by blind chance rather frequently, for calculation and skill, which meant very much in his career, could not eliminate chance altogether, that power which appears independently. Hence he must not let chance overthrow him. He might drop to the earth before its thrusts and contract a muscle, but only to parry, make an elastic spring, and seize new booty. His career was success rising and falling like a river. It was also a fever, ceaselessly bathed in cool calculation and reckoning. As to the rest, post wagons, railways, bells at railway stations urging to haste, glittering snows of the distant north, mountains towering on the boundary between two parts of the world, rivers cutting through uninhabited regions, horizons marked with the gloomy lines of Siberian forests, solitary since the beginning of ages. Then as a change, noise, glitter, throngs, the brilliancy of capitals, and in those capitals a multitude of doors, some of which open with freedom, while others are closed hermetically. Before doors of the second sort the pliancy of the cat's paw is needed. This finds a hole where the broad way is impossible. He was forced to be absent from his family for long months, sometimes for whole years, and even when living under the same roof with the members of it, he was a rare guest, never a real confiding companion. For permanence, intimacy, tender feeling in relations, with even those who were nearest him, Darvid had not the time, just as he had not the time to concentrate his thoughts on any subject whatever, unless it was connected with his lines, dates, and figures, or with the meshes of that net in which he enclosed his thoughts and his iron labor. As to amusements and delights of life, they were at intervals love affairs, flashing up on a sudden, transient, fleeting, vanishing with the smoke of the locomotive which rushed forward, at times luxuries of the table peculiar to various climates, or majestic scenery which forced itself on the eye by its grandeur and disappeared quickly, or some hours of animated card-playing. But above all, relations with social magnates, who were on the one hand of use, and on the other an immensely great honor to his vanity. Money and significance, these were the two poles around which all Darvid's thoughts, desires, and feelings circled, or at least it might seem all, for who can be certain that nothing exists in a man save that which is manifest in his actions? Surely no one, not the man himself even. After 3 years' absence, Darvid had returned only a few months before to his native city and to his own house, where he was as ever a rare and inattentive guest. Pi was laboring again. In the first week, on the first day almost, he discovered a new field. He was very anxious to seize this field and begin his Herculean efforts on it. But the seizure depended on a certain very highly placed personage to whom, up to that time, he had not been able to gain admittance. The cat's paw had played about a number of times to open a crevice in the closed door, but in vain. He desired a confidential talk of 2 hours, but could not obtain it. He turned then to a method which had given him real service frequently. He found an individual who had the art of squeezing into all places, of winning everyone, of digging from under the earth circumstances, relations, influences. Individuals of this kind are generally dubious in character, but this concerned Darvid in no way. He considered that at the bottom of life, dregs are found as surely as slime is in rivers which have golden sand. He thought of life's dregs and smiled contemptuously, but did not hesitate to handle those dregs and see if there were golden grains in them. He called his dubious assistants hounds, for they tracked game in thickets inaccessible to the hunter. Small, almost invisible, they were still better able than he to contract muscles, creep up, or spring over. He had let out such a hound a few days before to gain the desired audience, and had received no news from him thus far. This disturbed and annoyed Darvid greatly. He would rush into the new work like a lion into an arena and spring at fresh prey. The evening twilight came down into the series of great and small chambers. Darvid in his study, furnished with such dignified wealth that it was almost severe in the rich lamplight, received men who came on affairs of various descriptions, with reports, accounts, requests, proposals. In that study everything was dark-colored, massive, grand in its proportions, of great price, but not flashy. Not the least object was showy or fantastic. Nothing was visible save dignity and comfort. There were books behind the glass of a splendid bookcase, 2 great pictures on the wall, a desk with piles of papers, in the middle of the room a round table covered with maps, pamphlets, thick volumes. Around the table, heavy, deep, and low armchairs. The room was spacious with a lofty ceiling, from which hung over the round table a splendid lamp burning brightly. Darvid's remote prototype, the Argonaut Jason, must have had quite a different exterior when he sailed on toward Colchis to find the Golden Fleece. Time, which changes the methods of contest, changes the forms of its knights correspondingly. Jason trusted in the strength of his arm and his sword blade. Darvid trusted in his brain and his nerves only. Hence, in him, brain and nerves were developed to the prejudice of muscles, creating a special power which one had to know in order to recognize it in that slender and not lofty figure, in that face with shrunken cheeks, covered with skin which was dry, pale, and as mobile as if quivering from every breeze which carried his bark toward the shores which he longed for. On his cheeks shone narrow strips of whiskers, almost bronze-hued. The silky ends of these fell on his stiff, low collar. Ruddy mustaches, short and firm, darkened his pale, thin lips, which had a smile in the changeableness of which was great expression. This smile encouraged, discouraged, attracted, repelled, believed, doubted, courted, or jeered frequently. But the main seat of power in Darvid seemed to be his eyes, which rested long and attentively on that which he examined. These eyes had pupils of steel color, cold, very deep, and with a fullness of penetrating light which was often sharp, under brows which were prominent, whose ruddy lines were drawn under a high forehead, increased further by incipient baldness, a forehead which was smooth and had the polish of ivory. Between the brows were numerous wrinkles, like a cloud of anxiety and care. His was a cold, reasoning face, energetic, with the stamp of thought fixed between the brows, and lines of irony which had made the mouth drawn. A jurist, one of the most renowned in that great city, held in his hand an open volume of the Code, and was reading aloud a series of extracts from it. Darvid was standing and listening attentively, but irony increased in his smile, and when the jurist stopped reading, he began in a low voice. This voice, with its tones suppressed, as it were, through caution, was one of Darvid's peculiarities. "Pardon me, but what you have read has no relation to the point which concerns us." Taking the book, he turned over its pages for a while and began then to read from it. In reading, he used glasses with horn rims. From these, the yellowish pallor of his lean face became deeper. The renowned jurist was confused and astonished. "You are right," said he. "I was mistaken. You know law famously. How was he to avoid knowing it, since it was his weapon and safety valve? The jurist sat down on one of the broad and low armchairs in silence. And now the architect unrolled on the table the plan of a public edifice to which the last finish was to be given during winter and before work began in spring. Darvid listened again in silent thought, looking at the plan with his steel-colored eyes, in which at times there flashed sparks of ideas coming from the brain ideas, which, after a while, he presented to the trained architect. He spoke in a voice low and fluent. He spoke connectedly and very clearly. The architect answered with respect, and like the jurist who had preceded, not without a certain astonishment. Great God, this man knows everything. He moves as freely in the fields of architecture, mathematics, and law as in his own chamber. Darvid noticed the astonishment of those around him, and irony settled on his thin lips. Did those men imagine that he could begin such undertakings and be like a blind man among colors? Some begin thus but are ruined. He understood that in our time immense knowledge is the only foundation for pyramidal fortunes, and his memory alone knew the long series of nights which had passed above his head while it was sleepless in winning knowledge. Next appeared before the table a young man, lean and slender. His dark eyes expressed genius. His clothing was threadbare, his gestures almost vulgar. This was a sculptor, young but already famous. The man had incipient consumption, which brought excessive ruddiness to his face, a glitter to his eyes, and a short, rasping cough from his breast. He spoke of the sculptures which he was to finish for the edifices reared by the great contractor. He showed the drawings of them and explained his ideas. He rose to enthusiasm. He spoke more loudly and coughed at more frequent intervals. Darvid raised his head. The sensitive skin on his cheeks quivered with a delicate movement. He touched the shoulder of the artist with the tips of two white, slender fingers. "Best," said he. "It hurts you to speak too long." "My younger daughter coughs in just this way," remarked he to the other men present, "and it troubles me somewhat." "Perhaps a visit to Italy," said the architect. "Yes, I have thought of that, but the doctors note nothing dangerous so far." Then he turned to the sculptor. "You ought to visit Italy for its collections of art and its climate." The artist, not pleased with this interruption, did not answer directly, but went on showing his projects and explaining them, though his short breath and the cough, which was repeated oftener, made his conversation more difficult. Thereupon Darvid straightened himself. "I know very little of art," said he. "Not because I despise it. On the contrary, I think art a power, since the world does it homage, but because I lack time. Trouble yourself no further to exhibit plans and ideas here. I confirm them beforehand, knowing well what I do. Prince Zeno, whose good taste and intellect I admire, advised me to turn to you. At his house, moreover, I have seen works of your chisel which charmed me. Some declare that we men of finance and business represent only matter and have no concern with psyche, the soul. But I say that your psyche, now in Prince Zeno's palace, produced on me the impression that I am not matter only." Irony covered his lips, but with increased amiability he added, "Let us fix the amount of your honorarium. Permit me to take the initiative," said he, hurriedly. In a tone of inquiry he mentioned a sum which was very considerable. The sculptor bowed, unwilling or unable to conceal his delight and astonishment. Darvid touched him lightly on the arm, and conducted him to a great desk, one drawer of which he opened. The jurist and the architect at the round table exchanged glances. "A protégé of the prince," whispered one. "Cleverness, advertising," whispered the other. "I know from report," said Darvid to the young artist, "that sculptors must spend considerable sums before they begin a given work. Here is an advance. Do not hesitate. Money should be at the service of talent." The sculptor was astonished. He had imagined the millionaire as entirely different. "Money should be at the service of talent," repeated he. "I hear this for the first time from a man having money. Do you really think so?" Darvid smiled, but his face clouded immediately. "My dear sir," said he, "I would give, I think, much money if a cough like yours were not in the world." "Because of your daughter," began the sculptor, but Darvid had grown cold now, ceremonious, and he turned toward the round table. At the same moment a servant announced from the door a new guest. "Pan Arthur Kranitsky." The guest entered immediately after the servant, and passed the outgoing sculptor in the door. This guest was a man who carried his 5th decade of years with youthful elasticity of movement, and with a pleasant, winning expression on his still handsome face. In general, he seemed to be clothed with remnants of great manly beauty, from behind which, like soiled lining through rents in a once splendid robe, appeared, carefully concealed, old age, which was premature, perhaps. A tall man with a shapely oval face, he had dark whiskers, and the black curls of his hair did not cover successfully the bald spot appearing on the back of his head. His mustache was curled upward, in the fashion of young men, above ruddy lips. He passed through the study with a youthful step, and had the express intention of greeting the master of the house in a cordial and intimate manner. But in the cold eyes of Darvid appeared flashes well-nigh threatening. He barely touched with his fingertips the hand extended by the guest, a hand really aristocratic, white, slender, and greatly cared for. Pardon, dear Pan Aloysius, that I come at this hour, just the hour of thy important, immense, colossal occupations. But on receiving thy invitation I hastened. Yes, said Darvid, I need to talk with you a little. Will you wait a while? He turned toward the 2 men standing by the table, who, when he greeted Kranitsky, looked at him with a curiosity impossible to conceal. Every meeting of Darvid with that eternal guest, that offshoot of aristocratic families, roused the curiosity of people. For a good while Darvid did not know this, but at last he discovered it, and now his quick glance caught on the lips of the famous jurist a barely discernible smile, to meet which a similar smile appeared on the lips of the architect. He discoursed a few minutes more with the 2 men. When they turned to go, he conducted them to the door. When that was closed, he turned to Kranitsky and said, Now I am at your service. No one had ever seen service so icy cold, and having in it the shade of a restrained threat. Kranitsky, in view of this, spent more time than was needed in placing his hat on one of the pieces of furniture. Besides, an expression of alarm covered his face, now bent forward, and, in the twinkle of an eye, the wrinkling of his forehead and the dropping of his cheeks made him look 10 years older. Still with grace, which was unconscious, since it had passed long before into habit, he turned to Darvid. Thou hast written to me, dear Pan Aloysius. I have called you, interrupted Darvid, for the purpose of proposing a certain condition and a change. From a thick, long book he cut out a page on which previously he had written a few words in haste, and giving it to Kranitsky, he said, Here is a bank check for a considerable sum. Your affairs, as I hear, are in a very disagreeable condition. Kranitsky's face grew radiant from delight, and became 10 years younger. Taking the check presented to him, he began, with a certain hesitation, Dear Pan Aloysius, this service, really friendly, which thou art rendering me, even without request on my part, is truly magnanimous, but be assured that the moment income from my property increases. Darvid interrupted him a second time. We know each other so long that I cannot be ignorant of what your property is, and what income you receive from it. You have no property. You own a little village, the income from which has never sufficed to satisfy even 1/2 of your needs. In that little village you would have passed your life unknown to the great world if your mother had not been a relative of Prince Zeno and some other coronets of 9 quarterings. But since you had relationships so brilliant through your mother, high society did not suffer from the loss of your presence. I know all that relates to you. You need not try to lead me into error. I know everything. On the last words he put an emphasis which seemed to bring Kranitsky into a profound confusion, which he could not master. Parole d'honneur, began he, I do not understand such a real friendly service with such a tone. You will understand at once. This sum offered you is not a friendly service, but a simple commercial transaction. To begin with, I insist that for the future you cut short all relations with my son Marian. Kranitsky stepped back a number of paces. With Marianne, exclaimed he, as if not wishing to believe his own ears. I break all relations with him. Is it possible? Why? How can that be? But you yourself. That is true. I myself began this. I wish that my family, which during my frequent absences resided here permanently, should move in that social sphere which I considered most desirable, and I asked you to be the link between my family and that sphere. I did what you desired, interrupted Kranitsky in turn, and raising his head. Darvid, looking firmly into his face, said in a low voice slowly, but the ice of his tones seemed at moments to break from the boiling of passion confined beneath them. Yes, but you, sir, have demoralized my son. Of himself he would never have gone to such a degree of corruption and idleness. You drew him from study, you led him into all kinds of sport, you took him to all places of amusement, from the highest to the lowest. On returning, after 3 years' absence, I found Marion withered morally. Luckily he is a child yet, 23 years of age. It is possible to save him. The process of salvation I begin by forbidding you to have any further relations whatever with my son. Darvid grew terrible during his remaining words. His fingers were sinking into the table on which he rested his hand. The cluster of wrinkles between his brows became deeper, his eyes had the flash of steel in them. He was all hatred, anger, contempt. But Kranitsky, who at first listened to him as if unable to move from astonishment, boiled up also with anger. "What do you say?" cried he. "Does not my hearing deceive me? You reproach me who during your ceaseless occupations and absences have been for many years, one may say, the only guardian of your family and director of your son. Well, then do you not remember our former intimacy, and this, that it was I who made you acquainted with the highest families of this city and all this country? Do you not remember your confidential statements to me that you wished to give your daughters in marriage within those circles to which my connections might be a convenient bridge for you? Do you not remember your requests that I should introduce Marion into the best society and teach him the manners prevailing there? Very well. You were making your millions in peace, going after them to the ends of the earth, while I did everything that you wished, and now I meet with reproaches, which, at the very least, are expressed without delicacy. Des reproches, des grossieretés. Mais qu'un n'a pas de nom, c'est inouï. This demands the satisfaction of honor. His indignation was genuine and heartfelt. It brought out a deep flush on his still shapely face. A stony amazement fell on Darvid. True, that man spoke the truth. Remember to subscribe.